And we are now less than 1 hour until liftoff. This day is the
Dragon, you are go for section 6. When ready, report go for launch.
Dragon copies. We're stepping into section 6 at 4.100, preparation for LES Army.
Good readback.
So again, we are now less than 1 hour until liftoff, and this day is the continuation of regular crew flights to the space station from U.S. soil. SpaceX's Crew-5 mission will be the company's 6th crewed spaceflight for NASA, following the crewed test flight Demo 2 and 4 previous operational crewed missions to the International Space Station. It will also be SpaceX's 8th crewed spaceflight overall, including the private orbital mission Inspiration 4.
Today, our crew is flying on board Dragon Endurance. It will be the second flight for this capsule, and it will be taking a ride on a brand new Falcon 9. Now, it's been a great countdown so far. Weather, as Kate has been updating us with, is still good for T0, so the excitement just continues to pick up here as we get closer to that T0.
SpaceX Dragon in section 6, Crew-5 is go for launch.
Copy that, Nicole. Crew-5 is go for launch.
And you just heard it yourself. Crew-5 is go for launch. Another exciting milestone. We did start our coverage earlier today with the crew heading to the launch pad. And prior to that, the SpaceX team did help the crew put on their spacesuits and conduct initial checkouts before crew walkout. Crew walkout was where Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, Koichi Wakata, and Anya Kikina gave final goodbyes with friends and family gathered outside the operations and checkout building before they began that roughly 20-minute ride to pad 39A.
And we were able to watch the crew as they boarded their Teslas and headed down the NASA Causeway, headed towards the launch pad. And once they arrived at the pad, the crew took a moment to enjoy the view of the vehicle as that they will be taking flight on this afternoon, and then headed up the fixed service structure to begin a process known as crew ingress, where the astronauts entered the Dragon spacecraft. The SpaceX team then performed a series of checks to ensure the suits, seats, and vehicle interactions were all functioning properly.
And a short time ago, the team did close out Dragon's hatch, and the crew is safely inside. So with less than an hour to go until liftoff, things will continue to pick up as we get close to the go, no-go pole to arm the launch escape system and begin propellant loading.
The crew pull for readiness was completed at the T-minus 60-minute mark, and the Dragon pull for prop load is coming up here at T-minus 55 minutes. After that, at T-minus 45 minutes, will be an internal mission control Hawthorne pull, and then the launch director's pull for propellant loading. When we get to about T-minus 40 minutes, the crew access arm will retract, and the crew will get the call to close their visors and to arm the launch escape system. Now, this is the automated safety system in place that can fire the 8 Super Draco thrusters on Dragon to quickly separate the crew from the rocket, either on the pad or during the flight on the ride uphill.
And then once we reach about T-minus 35 minutes, propellant loading for the Falcon 9 will begin. So we did hear that the crew is go for launch. Great news. So with that, let's send it back to the team in Florida. Megan?
Great news, guys. So yeah, now I'm joined with Brian Onyate, but I'm going to have him say his title because I think I'm going to mess it up. So you say what you are.
Sure. Good morning. Yeah, I'm the Chief of the Utilization and Life Sciences Office here at Kennedy Space Center.
Yeah, it was a little long. I was like, I'm going to have him say it.
Yep, long title.
So I wanted to talk to you about how NASA has been studying plant growth and microgravity for many years now. So tell us about the 2 experiments that Crew-5 is going to be working on while they're on station.
Sure. We have 2 experiments going up. One is more of a plant research experiment. We call it Plant Habitat 03. It will be going into the Advanced Plant Habitat. And actually, that plant experiment is doing a generational study. So as you can see, that's the advanced plant habitat, and the plant that is growing in there is called Arabidopsis. It's our model plant, and basically we're going to grow that and get it all the way to seed. And the study is basically getting those seeds, bringing them back, and then reflying those seeds to see what happens. So what's interesting is...
And the second picture, right, that we have, that's how you capture the seeds.
Yeah, that's how we capture the seeds. What's interesting about those seeds, they're actually the size of pepper. So imagine the pepper that you put on your food, very tiny, very small. So we had to actually develop these capture bags to grab those seeds. So what we're noticing is in a previous experiment, the DNA of the plant actually changed, and it almost seemed like it was trying to protect itself from the environment of space, the harsh environment that's up there. So what we want to study is, can we actually grab those seeds, and will those seeds remember that environment? So when we fly the second generation, will they kind of have a leg up? Will they go already kind of pre-programmed to protect themselves, so that way the plants will thrive in space?
That's interesting. Why is that something that you wanted to see? What can we learn from that or use? Yeah,
so what we can do is, for exploration with NASA, obviously we want to get to the orbiting station around the moon one day, or the surface, or the transit vehicle, or Mars. How can we better prepare the plants that we send, or the crops that we send up there, so that they actually are ready to go, they'll thrive, and we understand what's happening, so that the crew can actually consume something great. So,
always forward thinking here at
always
NASA.
Forward
We're
thinking.
great.
Yeah, always forward thinking.
Well, let's talk about the second experiment. That one's called Veg-05, and we have some props here to kind of walk people through that,
Yeah,
right?
we do, yeah. So Veg-05, it's actually, we're growing dwarf tomato plants, and we're going to put them in this, what we call here is a plant pillow. What's interesting, it's actually made out of Kevlar, so exactly what police use in their police vests, so I guess they might be bulletproof, plant pillows. But yeah, so these plant pillows, it's just basically, how do we hold the soil, how do we put the fertilizer and the seed in there in order for us to grow the plants?
Because they would just fly around on the space station.
They would just fly around on the space station. So we have a little, what we call a quick disconnect here. This is where we apply the water. So once we apply the water in there, we have to keep watering it like here on Earth, and just let the plants grow and let them thrive in space. So,
and you mentioned the fertilizer.
Yep, the fertilizer and the arsenite. So what you see there on the right there is the arsenite, which is actually clay chips, right? It's the soil that basically allows the water to be absorbed and allows the plants' roots to kind of grow in there and grab water and nutrients. The second there that you see there is a fertilizer, and it's a slow release fertilizer. So when we add water into it, it kind of dissolves little by little, and it provides the food that the plants need so that they can grow.
Okay, so why is this important for us on space, but also here on Earth, to learn about this particular experiment?
Sure, both of these experiments are important. One is obviously for exploration, we want to make sure that the seeds that we send, the plants that we grow, will thrive, right? So how can we make them excel in space, right? And the second piece with Veg-05, which we find interesting, is how can we actually give food for the crew to eat on orbit, right?
Sure.
So healthy, nutritious food. This is actually going to be our second flowering plant that we grow in space, which is awesome. So they'll grow up there, they'll have to pollinate, and the crew members might have to be our space bees. We don't have bees up there to help us pollinate, so they might have to, help with pollination. They'll grow, and then hopefully they'll get some nutritious fresh food up there. And the benefit, what I find interesting here for Earth is there's a lot of things that we learn with ISS. ISS is basically a laboratory or another test tool. So we really want to see what data can we gather from growing up there. So when we bring it down to Earth, if we're in a stressful environment or another environment that is challenging, what did we learn up there so we can actually grow better crops here on Earth?
I love hearing about the science, Brian. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
No problem. Sounds great. Thank you.
We'll send it back to you guys.
Thank you, Megan and Brian. And throughout the show, we've been taking your hashtag Ask NASA questions from social media. We have time for a few more that have been coming in, and we appreciate those questions coming in. If you want to submit one, it's hashtag Ask NASA on our streaming channels, NASA Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Twitch. The question is from Aditi on YouTube. He asked Bob Binkin, how was the launch experience different on Space Shuttle and Crew-Dragon? Was one better than the other?
No, it's a great question, Daryl. We often get asked which vehicle is better, which one we love the most. And from my perspective, I loved them both. I had a great opportunity to fly and build space station with the space shuttle, but then rotate as a crew member with the Dragon on a modern spacecraft. That was a really neat aspect to see something that was kind of built in the 21st century versus something that was built, in almost the middle of the 20th century. If you look back at the technology that was on board the shuttle, just super excited to have an opportunity to fly on such a cool modern new ship.
And now, next question at Mike Mangano. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Asked, and this is a fitting question for you, Bob. Did the NASA astronauts who fly the Dragon capsule help in the design of the capsule. Why, yes, they did, and that was you.
You know, it was an interesting experience, I think, for both Doug and I to have the opportunity to not only fly on a new spacecraft, but be a part of shaping it for crews to come forward. And I think as we went through that process, the SpaceX team really learned how to work with us and how to take our inputs and incorporate them into design whenever they could, and explain to us when they couldn't, because everything that we wanted they couldn't necessarily do. But we were able to compromise and come up with good solutions so that years later, maybe in Crew-5's case, you know, they wouldn't be cursing Bob and Doug's name as to what they had agreed to or said was acceptable when the time came. We wanted to have opportunities for them to have choices. We included the opportunity to write on paper, but also to have a tablet, you know, so that crews, as they went forward with their missions, would be able to find the place that, you know, helped them be as successful as they could be. And so I'm hopeful that there just aren't too many curses associated with Bob and Doug, and it's mostly, you know, hey, those guys, they were thinking when they did this. So,
and we've had good results so far with 4 launches and the 5th today. Our next question comes from @morearts.com. If the astronaut schedule shifts during docking activities, does their schedule shift later in the day or the next morning? You know, we do know that the ISS crew is sleep shifting in order to accommodate this crew.
It's true, Daryl, that the crew actually has to sleep shift to accommodate the schedules of the vehicle traffic that arrives on board the space station. There are even times when the vehicle arrives a few minutes early or a few minutes late, and the crew needs to be ready for that as well. And so the crew does shift their day around to support all the operational activities, not only vehicle traffic and arrivals, but a spacewalk may impact things, or other activities that are happening on the ground, for example, might drive a schedule to be specific as well. But the crew's given time to recover after each of those sleep shifts.
Very good. And for those watching, if you want to ask a question of Bob Behnken, just follow us on Twitter @NASA Social, or check us out on the web at nasa.gov/social. Thanks for answering those questions, Bob. Great job. Let's send it now back out to Kate at SpaceX for an update on the countdown. Kate?
Always love hearing those responses from any astronaut, but especially Bob, because he flew on our DM2 mission a couple years ago. So at this point in time, we're now under an hour. We're at T-minus 48 minutes, and the SpaceX launch team is finishing the final review of data from checkouts of Falcon 9 over the last hour. The launch director has verified with the launch weather officer that weather meets propellant loading constraints. So next up will be to poll the team for readiness, both for propellant load and for launch. This will be the last poll before liftoff. The 7 SpaceX responsible engineers, often called REs, indicate that they are go by electronically voting on the online countdown procedure. The launch director, or LD, as you hear it called on the nets, also checks with the Dragon mission director, or MD, and the NASA launch manager to make sure that they are also ready. Earlier, you saw the vehicle assembly building called the VAB. The Falcon and Dragon launch team, as well as key NASA launch members, are in the Launch Control Center adjacent to the VAB. They have a view straight toward Pad 39A through the large windows of Firing Room 4. Now there on screen, you can see the Dragon capsule on the right-hand side. The crew access arm is still in the service position. I've recently heard that the closeout team has departed the tower, and they're in the process of departing the blast danger area. Now, with the crew on board Dragon waiting for next instructions, which will be to stow the crew arm for launch, the crew arm sequence will be armed and initiated. We should get a good view of the access arm as it
Attention
swings.
operators on countdown. Polling is complete. The team has pulled go for crew access arm retract, LES arm, propellant load, and launch. For all operators in MCCX and Firing Room 4, both control rooms will go into lockdown at T-minus 45 minutes and will remain in that state until the launch escape system is disarmed. All operators are to remain at their console and maintain a sterile cockpit until MD confirms successful disarming of the launch escape system, following orbit insertion or propellant offload in the event of a scrub. For non-urgent no-go conditions, brief the CE or LD, and they will approve aborting the countdown. For urgent issues affecting the safety of the operation, operators shall call hold on the countdown net. Launch control will abort the launch auto sequence and immediately proceed into launch abort. At T-minus 10 seconds, launch control will be hands-off, relying on automated abort criteria for the remainder of the count. Operators advise the launch director whether structural breakup or fire is imminent or occurring per Dragon manual escape flight rules. Launch control at this time. You may proceed with arming the crew arm for movement.
Launch control copies. Proceeding to arm crew arm for movement.
All right, quick recap there. All really good news. It sounds like the final poll has been conducted and all of the responsible engineers polled go, as well as the range they polled ready for launch, and the NASA team, the NASA launch team is also ready for launch. So everything continuing to look good. We just heard there that the crew arm, the crew access arm will be armed for retraction, meaning it will move away from the Dragon capsule.
Crew access arm retraction started.
All right, and there we should get a view of that crew access arm now moving away from Dragon capsule. Again, this will swing out into its launch position. This is the final change to the crew access arm, to the crew tower. Of course, the transporter erector will move away from the rocket as it lifts off and just shortly before liftoff. So that, in fact, will be the last major physical change that we see to the pad. But this crew access arm retraction is the final, will be the final state for the access arm for launch. This retraction should take about a minute to complete. Now, as I mentioned before, the range continues to be go for launch, monitoring the clearance area around the launch pad, as well as air and sea space around the flight corridor. And of course, here at Kennedy Space Center, as you see on your screen, the conditions are gorgeous. Everything continues to be acceptable for launch. Many things go into consideration, such as ground winds, any rain that might be in the area, as well as potential for lightning, any thick clouds, and of course, as I mentioned before, downrange landing zones. We have mentioned before that we've been tracking those, but everything continues to look green for launch. At this point in time, everything is looking on time for our liftoff at noon Eastern. We can see that crew access arm continuing to retract. Pretty cool shot there from inside the arm on the right-hand side of your screen as we see Dragon slowly move out of the frame. So with all that being said, the teams are ready. We will begin the propellant load at T-minus 35 minutes. And we are getting excited here at SpaceX headquarters. The energy is definitely starting to pick up outside of mission control. But with that, let's hand it off to Daryl to check in back over there at Kennedy Space Center.
All right, thank you, Kate. And back here on the lawn and the host desk, looking out at what one of my coworkers called a picnic vibe, with the media and NASA social folks all joined here to watch Crew-5 launch in just
crew
about
access
42
arm
minutes.
retraction complete.
And there you heard confirmation that crew access arm has fully retracted from the rocket. A gorgeous shot there from our flight operations team here at the Kennedy Space Center, a helicopter encircling the pad right now to give you that view. Great job, fellas. T-minus 42 minutes and counting as we zip around Launch Complex 39A. The background, the launch tower for Dragon, and in the foreground, a Starship launch tower under construction. Up next, we're looking at the launch escape system getting ready to arm, and of course that comes right before we start loading propellant. We're expecting to hear those call-outs in just a bit. On a beautiful bluebird day at the Kennedy Space Center. Our Crew-5 is in their seats at the very top of that rocket, inside the capsule Endurance, making its second flight. There they are, from left to right. Cosmonaut Anna Kikina, Josh Cassada, Nicole Mann, and Koichi Wakata.
And Daryl, they're getting into position to begin their procedure that'll have them arming that launch escape system that you mentioned. They'll be able to hear some clicking of valves and follow along on their display screen as once they've kicked off that procedure, as the vehicle kind of catches up and completes that arming sequence. And as you know, once the fueling operations begin, the crew has to be ready to potentially launch somewhere if there was some sort of a problem. And so that launch escape system needs to be in place and armed in preparation for that fueling operation to begin. That system will stay armed throughout the ascent phase until the crew is actually safely in orbit, allowing them a safe way to escape from the Falcon 9 rocket should there be any sort of a problem with the vehicle.
And we're expecting to see the astronauts close their visors and arm the launch escape system that you just talked about, Bob. Here in a little over a minute, we'll get the call out from the launch team.
You'll also see them ensure that their feet are in the appropriate locked-in position, their straps are tight, because again, should that system be required, they might be going for a pretty significant dynamic ride. But of course, we don't expect that to happen today, but they'll have that system in place just in case as the appropriate safety measure.
Now, Bob, that launch escape system, powered by Super Draco engines, capable of moving Dragon a half a mile in just 7.5 seconds, which is equivalent to a peak velocity of 436 miles per hour. I know you know this system well. You were very much briefed and very aware of its capabilities. You want to be able to not only get off the launch pad, but also get off the rocket while in flight. So it's got to move fast.
Absolutely, Daryl. And for shuttle systems, the crew would really have to do a lot of manual activities to steer the vehicle through the appropriate escape or abort scenarios, as we talked about them in those days. But this system is highly automated, and the crew primarily follows along with its operations.
Dragon, you are go for Section 7 of 4.100 to close visors and arm the launch escape system.
SpaceX Dragon copies stepping into Section 7. All crew visors are closed. We are arming the launch escape system.
SpaceX copies all.
That's Commander Nicole Mann reporting back and confirming their visors are closed and they are ready to arm the launch escape system.
And you can see the crew members pulling their straps and ensuring that they are buckled in, because from a crew perspective, that relaxation period that I talked about earlier is now over.
Yeah, it's all business now. Want to make sure that you're in your seat, firm and tight, for the operation of fueling.
This is also the part of the operation that starts to be a little bit different than training. You really can't capture the tones.
This is MD on countdown 1. Launch escape system is verified armed.
All right, we got the verification of the armed escape system.
So from a training perspective, the sounds and things that the crew will hear during the loading operation are just different than they're able to capture from a training perspective. And so now's when it starts to, again, be a little bit different from a crew perspective.
There's no simulating that system.
There is some acoustics that they tried to capture.
Falcon 9 tanks will be venting for the start of prop load. Expect loud venting.
That they tried to capture with the Demo 1 audio, if you will. But as you heard in the comm that just came through there, you need to get reminded to expect loud venting during some of the operations. And these are new things from a crew perspective that you've been briefed on, but now you're going to hear them for the first time.
3 of the 4 crew members inside that capsule right now have never flown to space before. They are first-time flyers. The lone exception, Koichi Wakata, who was a veteran with JAXA, and is getting ready to embark on his 5th flight to space. And as we wait for the next mark,
the crew's experience, whether it's a space shuttle or a Soyuz or the Dragon vehicle or Starliner or Artemis, as we move towards that, these experiences are all slightly different. And so I'm excited to hear, Koichi's discussion as he tries to balance and describe all 3 of them side by side when he gets back from this mission.
Would love to hear him talk about the comparisons. There's only a few astronauts like him, right, that have been able to fly on all 3 vehicles.
Yes, and as we go forward here with the Artemis missions coming forward, I'm excited to have folks compare and contrast their Orion experience, their SLS experience with Falcon 9 or our other rockets.
That's going to be fun. Just a few seconds now, and we're awaiting the confirmation to the beginning of loading propellant into the Falcon 9 rocket. With a beautiful shot there as we encircle the launch pad. Just a few more seconds until that call out.
Propellant loading has started.
And so it begins. The loading of propellant aboard the Falcon 9 rocket, liquid oxygen and RP1. Got your propellant and your oxidizer, which blended together make quite the combustion. Millions of pounds of thrust to get Crew-5 into space.
You know, there are a lot of details to that operation, Daryl, with each of the stages, and as you mentioned, the oxidizer and the fuel both needing to be loaded, and so the crew will follow along with that carefully as the loading operation commences. If there was any reason for them to need to stop that operation, the crew would expect that propellant loading to kind of be backed out and reversed, and so they'll want to understand the state of that fueling operation going forward, just in case they had to back out of it.
And we've got a social question now from @GrantB117, who asks, how long does it take to complete the fueling operations?
You know, it's a great question, Daryl, and they started it at 35 minutes because that's really prior to liftoff, because that's how long it takes for the loading operations to kind of get executed. The crew goes through the process, the ground team, of loading that propellant, ensuring that they get the proper commodities on board. The actual sequencing of things might be affected a little bit by the temperature on a given day, but they have that process well monitored, and they begin at 35 minutes because that's how long it takes to get the rocket all fueled up.
Thank you for answering those questions, and to you out there for asking the questions. Keep them coming. #AskNASA on our various social platforms. And again, now that fueling for Falcon 9 has started, that means the 8 Super Draco engines inside Crew Dragon are ready, if needed, to launch the capsule away from Falcon 9 in an instant, should there be any kind of emergency associated with the rocket or the pad. The NASA and SpaceX teams have trained extensively for exactly that type of contingency. And so now let's go over to Kate Tice at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne for another operations update. Kate?
Thanks, Daryl. You can probably tell by the background noise that things are starting to get more exciting now that we're just practically 30 minutes away from launch of Crew-5, certainly counting down the final minutes. Everything's still looking good for Falcon 9 and Dragon. With that launch escape system now armed, we are heading for an on-time launch just 32 minutes from now. As you saw, Falcon 9 propellant load began right on time at T-minus 35 minutes. The first and second stages of Falcon 9 are each loaded with 2 liquid propellants. One is fuel, which is loaded into a tank at the bottom of each stage, and the other is an oxidizer, and that's loaded into a tank at the top of each stage. The fuel that we use to power the Merlin engines is a refined kerosene referred to as RP1, or Rocket Propellant 1. The oxidizer loaded on each stage is a densified liquid oxygen, or LOX. Densified means that it's kept much colder than typical for launch vehicles, and it takes up less volume. And as such, this allows for more oxidizer to be loaded into the first and second stages. Now, to ignite the fuel and oxidizer in the Merlin rocket engine, we use an ignition fluid called TTEB. When TTEB comes into contact with oxygen, it burns, giving off a green-colored flame. Once we have that flame going, we add in the kerosene fuel to the Merlin chamber, and the engine ramps up to full power. You might actually be able to see that green flash just as the second stage engine ignites following stage separation, which is expected to happen about 2 minutes and 48 seconds into flight. Right now, we're topping off helium into pressure vessels on both stages. This is used to pressurize tanks in flight as propellant is pulled out of those tanks by the Merlin turbo pumps. Now, on board the spacecraft, the astronauts are monitoring systems from their crew monitors.
Stage 1 cryo-helium loading has started.
All right, there we just heard that the cryo-helium load has begun. Again, that is going into those pressure vessels that I mentioned earlier. Now, the crew training simulator has included playback of the sounds that were recorded in a previous Dragon capsule during recent flights. So all of the pops and the hisses that the vehicle puts out, all the crew has heard those before, though not live. So they are prepared for all the noises, the extra noises that they're now hearing. As for the range, continues to report no problems. They are go to support launch. Weather also clearly looking great. I think we're actually seeing even fewer clouds than we were about 20 minutes ago. We had a less than 10% chance or probability of violation of our weather constraints, also known as a POV. So that's really good. That is for the launch site conditions. We are also tracking downrange weather conditions as well as launch sites around the world in the unlikely event that Dragon needs to escape. Now, as a reminder, today we have an instantaneous launch time because we're heading to the International Space Station. So at this point in time, if we hear a hold for any reason, we will have to stand down and target our backup launch opportunity, which is tomorrow, just under 24 hours from today's planned launch. At this point in time, at just under T-minus 30 minutes till launch, let's turn it back over to Jesse and Sandra for an overview of what's to come until liftoff.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Always great to hear that we've got good weather and it looks beautiful over there at KSC. For Crew-5, the astronauts' flight to station will take about 29 hours.
And as we await T0 in just about 28 minutes from now, the ground operations team is doing a series of system checks to make sure both Dragon and Falcon 9 are ready for launch. You're looking at a live view of our teams at the Cape as they prepare for liftoff. And as we wait for the launch clock to hit 0, we want to give you an overview of what the ascent portion of the mission will look like.
Now, once we hit T0 and a successful launch occurs, we will watch Falcon 9 and Dragon lift off from historic launch pad 39A and make their ascent.
About 50 seconds into flight, Falcon's 9 engines will throttle down to help pass through the period of maximum dynamic pressure on the rocket, or what we typically refer to as max Q. At this point in time, the vehicle will be going supersonic.
Now, once we're through the period of maximum dynamic pressure, we can throttle up our 9 Merlin engines again. From there, at about 2.5 minutes into flight, we have a series of 3 events that will happen in rapid succession.
The first is MECO, or main engine cutoff, and this is where all 9 Merlin 1D engines shut off in preparation for stage separation, which is, of course, our second event. This is where the first stage detaches from the second stage, and the first stage will make its way back to Earth for landing, while the second stage continues on its journey with the third event, which is SES-1, or second stage engine start number 1, and this is where the MVAC engine lights up and propels the second stage along with our Crew-5 astronauts to orbit.
As Stage 2 heads towards its targeted drop-off orbit, Stage 1 will execute 2 burns in order to make its way back down to Earth. The first is the entry burn, and that's where 3 of the 9 M1D engines will reignite and shut down. And this helps to slow the stage down in preparation for entry back into the Earth's atmosphere.
While the first stage is heading back to Earth, the second stage will cut off its 1 Merlin engine that was ignited right after stage separation. Once this happens, we will wait for confirmation of a good orbital insertion.
About 90 seconds after Dragon gets into orbit, Falcon 9 will land back on Earth. The landing burn is just a single engine burn, powerful enough to bring the vehicle's speed down rapidly in order to touch down on the drone ship at about 9.5 minutes into the mission.
While Falcon 9's first stage is landing, Dragon is preparing to separate from the second stage. About 3 minutes after the second stage gets into orbit, we should have a great view of Dragon with its 4-person crew drifting away from the second stage. Once Dragon is a short distance away, it will begin checking out its Draco maneuvering thrusters to make sure Dragon continues to increase separation distance from the second stage. And it is worth noting that these are not the Super Draco engines that would be used during an abort scenario.
About 40 seconds after separation, Dragon's nose cone deploy sequence will begin. It will take roughly 4 minutes for the nose cone hooks to unlatch and open, exposing its guidance navigation controls that will help Dragon autonomously fly to the space station.
And lastly, once the nose cone is deployed, the remaining Draco thrusters on the forward bulkhead will be checked. From there, over the next...
Stage 2 cryo-helium loading has started.
From there, over the next 29 hours, Dragon will be in its rendezvous and approach phases, undergoing a number of phasing burns as it makes its way back to station. All that will be coming up soon, but for now, let's check back in with Shaniqua in Mission Control Houston. Shaniqua?
Thanks, Sandra. The flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston are laser focused on the onboard systems of the space station, making sure it is ready to receive Dragon vehicle tomorrow. They're also making sure communication links between the station, Dragon, and the ground are working properly. The consensus right now is that everything is proceeding nominally. Teams here in Mission Control Houston, the teams in Hawthorne, and the astronauts aboard the space station will monitor the autonomous docking of the Dragon spacecraft tomorrow evening. They'll perform a series of leak checks, then work to open the hatches both on the Dragon side and inside the space station's pressurized mating adapter. We expect hatch opening to take place around an hour and a half after docking. And once aboard, the astronauts will be greeted by Station Commander Samantha Cristoforetti, and then the whole station crew will join in for welcoming remarks to the new crew members. Now, due to critical science, this welcoming remarks will be about 90 minutes after the crew is on board. Once on board, the crew members will no longer be referred to as Crew-5, but rather as flight engineers of the International Space Station. Here in Mission Control, Flight Director Greg Whitney is on console overseeing the team for launch, and he will be back tomorrow for docking. We'll be on air continuously through Crew-5's arrival, but live coverage of docking is expected tomorrow around 4:57 p.m. Eastern Time. That's it from now. From Mission Control Houston, I'll toss it back to the team in Florida. Daryl, how's it looking?
Well, it's wonderful out here, Shaniqua. Wish you could be here. We got picnic weather out here at the press site and Launch Complex 39, where we are looking out for the launch of Crew-5 from historic Launch Complex 39A, a beautiful sweeping shot of the lawn where we have our special guests. The media are here. We've got NASA social folks who are out on the lawn, and of course, me and Bob. Bob's riding shotgun here as we take our coverage to the next level at the final 23 minutes of liftoff. Now, from the countdown, rather. We are just seconds away from the 5th astronaut rotation mission to the International Space Station under NASA's Commercial Crew Program. Commander Nicole Mann, pilot Josh Cassada, and mission specialist Koichi Wakata and Anna Kikina are strapped into their seats inside the Dragon Endurance at the very top of this rocket here. We are listening in to the communications as they talk live to the Falcon 9 team. The rocket is fueling. The operation is doing well. And the launch escape system is armed. Of course, that means Dragon is prepared to launch itself away from the Falcon 9 rocket in case of an emergency on the pad or after liftoff. So far, operations looking and sounding as expected. And we are counting down to our liftoff at just after noon, 12 p.m. and 57 seconds after the hour Eastern time. There was a 1-second adjustment. That's pretty typical as happens when we get to this stage of the mission. The mission is the continuation of rotational crew flights to the International Space Station from U.S. soil on private rockets and spacecraft. Of course, this would not have been possible without the success of the NASA SpaceX Demo 2 test flight now 2 years ago, and of course the safe delivery and return of crews 1, 2, 3, and eventually here in about a week, Crew 4. Of course, we're happy to have the pilot from Demo 2, and that's Bob Binken. Appreciate you being here, been giving us some great thoughts and explanations about everything that's been happening.
Well, thank you, Daryl. I'm super excited to be here for Crew-5 and get a chance to relive my experience during the Demo 2 mission.
And it's been a great one so far. We've watched the crew get into the capsule. We've watched, they worked through a couple of issues early on, but those have been cleared. A suit leak check and a hatch leak check that had to be double checked. Now we're rolling along and moving towards liftoff. A couple things that are coming up as we count down. We're going to have stage 2 RP1 load complete. That's in 20 seconds. A few seconds later, we'll get strong back chill. That will begin in order to set the stage for the Stage 2 liquid oxygen load. Of course, propellant's load is not an exact science, but once it completes, we'll hear that call out.
Stage 2 RP1 load is complete.
And there you heard it. Let's talk a little bit about the crew. If you're just joining us, we have a 4-person crew that we call Crew-5, and it's commanded by Nicole Mann. She holds a Master of Science in Mechanical Engineering and is a colonel in the Marine Corps. She was an FA-18 Hornet and Super Hornet test pilot and deployed twice aboard aircraft carriers in support of combat operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Nicole was selected by NASA in June of 2013, and in the years that followed, led the astronaut corps in the development of hardware for our Artemis program. Today, the Crew-5 commander will be flying into space for the first time, and once she reaches space, she will be the first Native American woman to stay on station. A historic first for NASA and for her.
Absolutely, Daryl. The astronaut corps is widely diverse, and I'm just proud to see Nicole join that crew on board the International Space Station.
With her is pilot Josh Cassada. He grew up in Bear Lake, Minnesota. The physicist and U.S. Navy test pilot flew the P-3C and the P-8A, as well as 23 combat missions. He later became an instructor at the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School, which is a path to NASA for military officers. Cassada is one of more than 100 graduates who have become astronauts, going all the way back to the Mercury program. More recently, he served as capsule communicator and mission control, but today he is the pilot aboard Dragon.
It's a seat I know well, and I look forward to seeing Josh support Nicole and the rest of the crew on their way towards the International Space Station.
The mission specialist now, Koichi Wakata, he's the veteran, a Japanese astronaut who has a doctorate in aerospace engineering. In 1996, he became the first Japanese mission specialist aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour for STS-72. Altogether, Koichi flew 4 Space Shuttle missions, a Roscosmos Soyuz, and was on a long-duration stay aboard the International Space Station. During his 2-decade career as an astronaut, Koichi has spent 11 months in space. Bob, you spent a fair amount of time in space yourself. It's great to have a veteran aboard.
It absolutely is, and in addition to being a veteran, Koichi just has a wonderful personality that I know is just it's key to kind of success on board the space station.
Our second mission specialist is Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina. She graduated from the Novosibirsk State Academy of Water Transport in 2006. In 2012, Anna officially became a candidate for the position of test cosmonaut. Crew-5 will be Anna's first flight into space, along with 2 of her other fellow astronauts. Now, each of these 4 crew members will be part of Expedition 68 once they arrive at the International Space Station. And there you see them there inside Crew Dragon Endurance, the second flight for this Dragon. I want to let you know, if you're here locally, you want to step outside and enjoy the launch, you got a small radio, you can pick us up on VHF radio frequency 146.940 on the megahertz scale, and on UHF radio frequency 444.925 megahertz FM mode. You can hear that all within Brevard County, right here on the beautiful Space Coast. And you can see the
Stage 2 LOX load has started.
Just got the call out that the Stage 2 LOX load has started, putting that liquid propellant into the second stage. Let's check back in with Kate Tice and get an update from Hawthorne. Kate?
Thanks, Daryl. We are T-minus 16 minutes away from launch, and everything continues to look great for Falcon 9 and Dragon. Falcon 9 began prop load at T-minus 35 minutes. The loading of RP1 fuel on the second stage is complete. That finished at T-minus 20 minutes. Fuel loading continues on the first stage. It is almost complete. That should be wrapping up here momentarily. Densified liquid oxygen loading is underway on both the first and second stages. Those look to be about 80% on the first stage and has only just recently begun on the second stage. So not much there yet. That will wrap up at T-minus 3 minutes and T-minus 2 minutes respectively. Now, as for checkouts of thrust vector controllers, what we call TVC wiggles, those are coming up. We basically check to make sure that the thrust vector controllers are able to actuate the engines themselves. That's what helps create gimbal for those engines, and gimbaling is actually how Falcon 9 steers itself. So those are coming up along with throttle valve checkouts on the engines. The Dragon mission director and team are currently reporting no issues, so really good on that front. Communication checkouts are complete. The crew access arm is retracted, as we can see there, and the crew is strapped in and ready to go, as you can see there on the right-hand side of your screen. Everybody continuing to monitor prop load there on their crew monitors. Now, final instructions to the crew come at T-minus 10 minutes. At that point, their crew displays will be configured for launch. This setup gives the crew insight into how the launch is proceeding and provides constant updates on vehicle health. At T-minus 5 minutes, we'll hear the call out that will be in terminal count, and at that point, Dragon will transition to internal power. We'll hear continued call outs on the countdown nets as we get closer to liftoff. As for range, they continue to be go, continuing to monitor the launch corridor, and everything remains green. As for weather, we're looking at 7-mile-per-hour winds at the launch site. And as I said before, as the countdown continues, we are seeing fewer and fewer clouds. Just an absolutely stunning day there at Kennedy Space Center. Let's check back in with Daryl to see the last couple minutes prior to liftoff.
Thanks, Kate, and it really couldn't be more perfect out here weather-wise for a launch. How about that, Bob?
It just looks absolutely stunning to look out and see the vehicle ready to go, the crew on board strapped in. I'm just super excited for them.
And there's a view of the countdown clock and the historic American flag that has been standing there since the Space Shuttle program. Now you're looking at a pic of Crew-5. Crew-5 flying aboard the Dragon capsule Endurance, and the booster that you see behind them that they're posing with is a brand new one. Actually was damaged in transit from California to Texas, but it was fixed, repaired. Crew did a great job, the SpaceX team, in getting it all ready. And at the time that Falcon 9 launches Dragon to space, the International Space Station will be 260 statute miles over Australia. Crew-5 will then spend the next 21 hours with Mission Control Team that you see there in Houston, standing by, getting ready for the beginning of this mission. They'll spend 29 hours chasing down the International Space Station for a rendezvous at 4:57 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow evening. One of the longer transits, Bob.
It's true. It's a little bit longer than usual, or average, I would say, as we work towards Crew-5. But as the launch dates shift around, that changes the time that you can actually arrive on space station. They've got plenty of consumables, so it should be fun to have some time in space.
And when they arrive tomorrow evening, we'll have live coverage on NASA TV of docking, as well as the Crew-5 welcome ceremony at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, 7:15 p.m. Central. And some final thoughts, Bob, as we get ready to watch Crew-5 launch into space.
You know, my opportunity to sit here and watch Crew-5 go has just been inspiring again to see another vehicle head towards the International Space Station. Again, I'm excited for them and just hopeful that Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna have just a wonderful mission. I know that they've got a wonderful launch in front of them.
Absolutely, and that's what we're rooting for here. And so with T-minus 11 minutes and counting, we're going to spin our chairs around and watch the launch, but we're going to let Kate and the team focus on the pad as we proceed through the final stretch of the countdown. We'll turn it over to Kate Tice at SpaceX headquarters in California to take us through. Take it away, Kate.
Thank Thanks, Daryl. As you can probably tell by the background noise, the crowd is definitely growing here at SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Certainly one of our company traditions is to watch the launch itself from behind Mission Control, which you see there on your screen. You can see this is Mission Control Hawthorne, or as you sometimes hear referred to as MCCX. And then, of course, a crowd of employees watching from behind. I personally also stand there if I'm not doing the webcast, so I can confirm it's a great spot to watch launch. Like I said, as you can see, the energy is certainly starting to grow now that we're about to hit T-minus 10 minutes. Beautiful view there of Falcon 9 and Dragon on the pad, ready to take Crew-5 to space.
We did discuss
Dragon, SpaceX, confirm crew displays are configured for launch.
Welcome. We would like to give a huge thanks to the NASA and SpaceX team, the thousands of people for their development, preparation, and training in getting Endurance and Crew-5 to the launch pad today, and your continued support in helping to make this a successful mission. We look forward to joining the rest of our Expedition 68 crew members aboard the International Space Station. And a special thanks on behalf of all the crew to our family and friends. It is your love and support that help make dreams come true. Now let's do this. Crew-5 displays are configured for launch.
Copy. And Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna, on behalf of the entire team at SpaceX, good luck, Godspeed, and enjoy the ride.
And those words from Nicole Mann, the first female commander of a Dragon, as she thanked the many folks that have helped get them to this point. We're now less than 9 minutes away from launch today. Upon liftoff, you'll hear a number and letter combinations which mark different abort zones throughout the flight, as well as some performance calls. The first two are 1A and 1B, and those signify the first stage and will last up to the very north tip of North Carolina. The next are 2A through 2E, and those will come into play once the second stage kicks in, lasting from the top of North Carolina all the way to the tip of Newfoundland in the northern Atlantic. You'll also hear a spot that is to be avoided, and you might hear Shannon or forward to Shannon, and that actually refers to Shannon, Ireland, meaning they would target off the east coast of Ireland if they were later in that second stage and did need to abort for some reason. So the next major milestone that we're looking towards will come just seconds from now, and that will be when engine chill begins on the first stage of the engine.
That's right. So engine chill is basically when we take a little bit of that super chilled, densified liquid oxygen and we flow it through the turbopumps of the Merlin M1D engines on the first stage. This helps to prepare the turbopumps and avoid any thermal shock to the hardware when they see the full flow of liquid oxygen during ignition. We're also expecting the conclusion of prop load for the RP1 on first stage to wrap up at T-minus 6 minutes. LOX load continues to be underway on both first and second stages, again wrapping those at T-minus 3 minutes and 2 minutes.
And after that, we'll hear a number of call-outs related to Dragon's flight computer. Some will be
Stage 1 engine chill has started.
And you did just hear that call out that stage 1 engine chill has begun. Coming up in just about 45 seconds, we should expect to hear that RP1 load is complete. RP1 load is that densified kerosene or rocket fuel that will help propel the crew into orbit. All of that RP1 is loaded into the first stage, and we are standing by to hear that it was loaded into the second stage as well.
Again, we expect that to wrap at T-minus 6 minutes. The venting that you see on screen is totally normal. That is just some
Stage 1, RP1 load is complete.
Great news there that RP1 load is now finished. As I was saying, the venting that you see on the vehicle is totally normal. That's just some of the super chilled, densified liquid oxygen just vaporizing as it comes into contact and vents from the vehicle.
And coming up, we'll also hear the call for Dragon to configure for terminal count, and then it will be transferred over to internal power. And then we'll hear that propellant tanks on Falcon 9 are getting ready to pressurize, which helps add some additional rigidity and structural support as we get ready for strong back retract.
That strong back will retract a couple of degrees at first, and then we will see it swing open completely just shortly, or at the moment of
Falcon 9
liftoff.
tanks will be pressurizing for strong back retract.
Right, there's that indication that we are preparing for that strong back retraction.
Coming up in just a few seconds, we should hear that Dragon is in terminal count.
Dragon is in configure for terminal count.
All right, there we heard that call. Dragon onboard computers have now taken control of the vehicle. As I mentioned before, first stage LOX, or liquid oxygen loading, is underway and will wrap up at T-minus 3 minutes. The second stage will wrap its LOX load at T-minus 2 minutes. Launch teams continue to report no issues, and everything remains green and for an on-time launch.
Retract has started.
And here in just a couple seconds, you might be able to see the strong back arm as it does begin to retract. As Kate said, it will recline 2 degrees.
We can just barely make out the clamp arms are now beginning to move. All right, now that those clamp arms are removed, as Sandra said, this will retract by 2 degrees, and then at liftoff, the strong back will retract another to 45 degrees, allowing Falcon 9 to clear. Strong back is part of the transporter erector, and the transporter erector is what provides the liquids, the gases, the electrical connections to the vehicle. It's also what we use to integrate the vehicle in its horizontal position, and we can see that 2-degree retraction just now complete.
And the next call out that we should hear in about 20 seconds is that the first stage LOX load is complete.
Stage 1 LOX load is complete.
And there we go, all of the oxidizer loaded on stage 1. Soon we'll hear that stage 2 LOX load is complete, and that will be the last propellant call out we'll hear today. Now less than 3 minutes until launch.
Dragon is in terminal count and is on internal power.
All right, there we heard the good news that Dragon is now on internal power. Again, the white clouds that you see there at the base of the Dragon trunk, totally normal. That's just the vapor from the liquid oxygen. Again, second stage now wrapping up its LOX load. Excuse me, first stage wrapping up its LOX load just a few minutes ago, and now moving toward wrap up of second stage LOX load, which will complete at T-minus 2 minutes.
Coming up on 2 minutes until liftoff, standing by for word that stage 2 LOX load has been completed.
Dragon is in auto idle. Stage 2 LOX load is complete.
There we heard the call out. Falcon 9 is now completely fueled. All of its propellants, so
Closeouts are starting. Expect loud landing.
all of its propellants, and we can see that leftover liquid oxygen now being vented or released, now flowing further away from the vehicle. So nearly 1 million pounds of liquid oxygen in RP1 now on board Falcon 9. It is fully loaded and ready for launch.
And coming up at T-minus 1 minute, we'll hear that Dragon is in countdown. Its flight computer will switch to countdown mode, and we'll hear that the flight termination system on Falcon 9 is armed.
SES is armed. Falcon 9 is in startup and is now controlling.
And there you heard it,
Dragon is in countdown.
Dragon's flight computer in countdown. The flight termination system now armed.
We should get the final go for launch from SpaceX launch director Mark Surtees.
Dragon, SpaceX, Godspeed, go for launch.
SpaceX Dragon, go for launch.
SpaceX
T-minus
reports
30
go. Crew reports go. 30 seconds until liftoff.
T-minus 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Engines full power. And liftoff. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Vehicle is pitching downrange. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
We're now at T plus 35 seconds into the 5th rotational crew mission on board Dragon and Falcon 9.
Coming up in just a few seconds, we'll hear the call out for stage 1 throttle down.
Stage 1 throttle down.
Falcon 9 engines throttling down to help pass through the period of maximum dynamic pressure.
This period is known as max Q, and once the vehicle... There we just heard that the vehicle is now traveling faster than the speed of sound. Once through max Q, we'll throttle those Merlin engines back up.
Max Q. Stage 1 throttle up. Stage 1 throttle.
Stage 1 Bravo.
Copy 1 Bravo.
That call out for 1 Bravo means we're in the second and final abort mode for the first stage, continuing to get good performance. The crew is already pulling over 2 Gs. And next up is going to be a couple of events in rapid succession. First will be engine chill on the second stage and back engine. And there you heard that call out. And then we'll have MECO, or main engine cutoff, where the 9 engines igniting will cut off in preparation for second stage separation. Then we'll see the single Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage ignite and continue to carry the Crew-5 astronauts to orbit.
Just like we did on first stage, that MVAC chill is intended to help pre-chill the hardware prior to the full flow of that densified liquid oxygen.
Stage 1 throttle down.
At this point in time, those 9 Merlin engines are beginning to throttle down in preparation for MECO, or main engine cutoff.
Standing by for MECO.
And MECO.
Stage 2 Alpha.
And stage separation confirmed. Copy 2 Alpha.
There we should see that second engine begin to ignite now. And obviously confirmed by the loud cheer behind us here at Mission Control Hawthorne.
And we're also in 2 Alpha for the aborts if needed. Again, second stage is lit and continuing to carry the Crew-5 astronauts into orbit.
We're now getting a view of the first stage after that stage separation. The second stage still being illuminated by that single Merlin vacuum engine, and that's on the right-hand side of your screen. First stage on the left-hand side of your screen making its way back to Earth. We will be attempting to land it on our drone ship, which today we are using Just Read the Instructions.
Acquisition signal, repeat up.
And we did hear that acquisition of the ground station in Bermuda. The first stage is continuing to make its way back to Earth, and the second stage is going to continue.
SpaceX, trajectory nominal.
Another good call, trajectory nominal.
Dragon copy.
Confirmation there from Commander Nicole Mann. You can also sort of see the Space Coast there in the background of the first stage on the left-hand side of your screen. It also looks like you can actually see the thrust plume created by the first stage as it's now rotating just out of screen.
Second stage is going to continue firing until a little over 8 minutes into the flight, really doing the heavy lifting now, getting the crew into orbit.
Everything continues to look nominal on both first and second stages. As I mentioned before, the first stage will be making a landing on one of our drone ships, which is currently parked a couple hundred miles off the coast of Florida in the Atlantic Ocean. So we can see now that...
Dragon, SpaceX, trajectory nominal.
Good confirmation there that we have good trajectory.
The second stage now traveling over 5,400 miles per hour. Crew is pulling a little more than 1 G right now. That's going to continue to ramp up, peaking just before we get to second stage cutoff here in just a few minutes from now.
First stage will be performing 2 separate burns, a re-entry burn where we reignite 3 of the Merlin M1D engines on the first stage. We ignite the center engine into radial engines to help slow it down as it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere. And then the second final burn, and that will be the landing burn on our drone ship.
And the single MVAC engine that you see...
Trajectory nominal.
The single MVAC engine that you see on the right of your screen is continuing to fire. We did hear another call out that trajectory is nominal. Crew heading in the direction that they are supposed to be. This single engine can produce over 220,000 pounds of thrust in the vacuum of space, now over 200 kilometers in altitude. We will start to hit events now in a rapid succession as the first stage continues to make its way back to Earth and the second stage continues its burn. Just a couple minutes left in that burn.
For those of you just joining us, just over 6.5 minutes ago, our 4 Crew-5 astronauts launched from Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and they are now making their way into orbit on the second stage inside Crew-Dragon.
Trajectory nominal.
Which we're hearing that the trajectory on that is nominal.
Dragon copy.
They are safe inside Dragon Endurance, whereas the first stage on the left-hand side of your screen is making its way back to Earth. We are coming up to the re-entry burn, which, as I said before, we ignite 3 of the 9 Merlin engines to help slow the booster down as it re-enters the dense part of the Earth's atmosphere. As the entry burn completes, we'll be in the final...
Stage 1, entry burn startup.
So there we heard the call out. You can there see it on your screen that that entry burn has been initiated.
And as that entry burn completes, we'll be in the final different abort phases here shortly, which essentially correspond to areas along the very northeastern seaboard of the U.S.
Stage 1, entry burn shut down.
Great news, that entry burn was shut down, and then those last all the way across the Atlantic off the coast of Scotland for those abort zones.
Everything continues to look nominal for both the first and second stages.
And the crew with the second stage still attached is now traveling over 13,000 miles per hour.
We're about 10 seconds away from SECO 1.
Copy, Shannon.
Shannon,
Stage 1, transonic.
That call out for Shannon, Ireland, indicative of our final abort zone. After this, we'll see second stage shut off, and we'll be listening for confirmation of a good orbit, which tells us the crew and Dragon are exactly where they need to be.
There we had confirmation that the
Stage
MVAC
1 landing burn.
has shut down simultaneously. The entry.
Dragon SpaceX nominal orbit insertion.
And you heard that call for a good insertion. We will coast for a few minutes.
There we can see the drone ship coming into view as Falcon 9 attempts.
Stage 1 landing leg deploy.
You can see those landing legs have now deployed. And as you can see on your screen, and you can hear by the clapping and cheering behind me, Falcon 9 has landed on our drone ship just with the instructions, parked off the coast of Florida.
And again, that second stage separation will be coming up just a couple of minutes now. We do coast for a few minutes after second engine cutoff to allow any rates or motion to dampen out and settle. And looks like we're going to get a view of the second stage as it separates here shortly. We did hear that the crew has been successfully inserted into a good orbit. Again, the crew is still attached to the second stage.
We are expecting stage separation to occur in just over a minute from now, about 1 minute and 8 seconds. And that's when when the second stage will separate from the Dragon trunk. The Dragon trunk is the part of hardware where we are able to house the cargo that is able to be exposed to the vacuum of space, as well as the solar panels which help power Dragon while it is on orbit. Again, that stage separation is now coming up in about 30 seconds. After stage separation, we will have nose cone deployment. Now that Dragon is in the vacuum of space, we will be able to open the nose cone and expose that forward hatch, which is what is utilized to dock autonomously with the International Space Station.
And that nose cone does stay closed for the flight uphill to help protect all of the guidance, navigation, and control sensors. We are standing by for second stage separation. And there is separation.
Dragon separation confirmed.
And Dragon, this is your launch director.
Dragon captain is on.
Dragon, this is your launch director on Dragon. On behalf of the entire launch and recovery team, it was an honor and a pleasure to be a part of this mission with you. And while October 3rd may belong to the Mean Girls, October 5th will forever belong to Crew-5. Godspeed, Endurance. Cheers.
Awesome. Thank you so much to the Falcon team. Woo! That was a smooth ride uphill. You got 3 rookies that are pretty happy to be floating in space right now, and 1 veteran astronaut who's pretty happy to be back as well. Let's see what you got to say, Koichi.
Falcon team, it was a smooth ride, and I see all the 3 happy faces here back in 0G, and I appreciate all the help to give us a smooth ride and training, and thank you so much. JAXA の支援隊の皆さん、非常にスムーズな打ち上げでした。打ち上げご支援していただいた皆さん、応援に駆けつけてくださった皆さん、ありがとうございました。この調子でチームワークを持って頑張ります。Thank you for your support. Anya.
Thank you, Falcon 9 and our fellow agencies, to Roscosmos, NASA, and JAXA, and SpaceX exactly for giving us that opportunity. We're so glad to do it together. And thank you for everybody, for all people who with us. Спасибо большое всем агентствам Roscosmos, NASA, JAXA и, естественно, SpaceX за предоставленную нам возможность. Мы рады всем экипажам делать то, что мы сейчас делаем. И большое спасибо всем людям, кто сейчас с нами.
Some really nice words there from the Crew-5 crew, as well as...
And Dragon South 9C, thanks for the words. Had a great ride. Have a good mission. We'll see you later.
A wonderful Mean Girls reference there by Launch Director Mark Soltis, and then we just heard from Chief Engineer Dan Alex. And we just heard our first Quindar tone, indicating the crew is in space.
Dehumidifier activation and service section Draco checkouts. Expected loss of signal, New Hampshire.
Dragon copy.
And Kate, it did look like we were getting our first views of that microgravity indicator.
I did see that as well.
And we're getting views now of the crew on orbit, 3 of them for the first time ever. We saw some cheers, some high fives. Looks like they're feeling great.
Hopefully we can see that zero-G indicator float back into view and hopefully get a better shot of it. I couldn't quite tell what it was, although it kind of looked like it may have been an Einstein doll. But that's just kind of what it looked like from the backside.
I think you're right, Kate. It looked like a baby Einstein to me. So the next milestone that we're looking ahead towards is the nose cone opening.
If you've just joined us, we had a successful liftoff exactly 16 minutes ago of the Crew-5 mission. They had an on-time liftoff from Kennedy Space Center at noon Eastern Time. They had a smooth ride up to orbit. The first stage landed successfully on our drone ship. Just read the instructions, and everything has been looking good so far. We are hoping to get another view on board Dragon once we're able to get that camera back. But so far, everything leading up to this point in time, we got a shot there of the MVAC engine, which is no longer firing. It is coasting with that attached to the second stage, which has been separated from Dragon. So everything was super smooth this morning, starting all the way back. I think we got here around T-4 hours, and super smooth countdown. Beautiful day from Kennedy Space Center. It looked like a gorgeous view from where Daryl and Bob were sitting. But yeah, we are standing by for the nose cone opening. Now that the Dragon spacecraft is in space, we are able to...
Expected loss of signal, Finland.
We are able to open up that nose cone and expose the forward hatch, which is what is utilized to autonomously dock with the International Space Station, but of course to protect that hardware as well as protect the guidance and navigation control hardware. We keep that nose cone closed during launch preparations and during the ascent portion. So as you can saw there momentarily, Dragon is in space, and the Crew-5 astronauts, all 4 of them, are floating, or they will be able to float soon. We're hoping to get another view of that zero-G indicator once we're able to bring onboard cabin views back to you of the Crew-5 crew. We always like to see what the zero-G gravity indicator is. As you saw earlier in the webcast, Bob actually brought the zero-G indicator that he and Doug used on the Demo 2 mission, a lovely sequin dinosaur, which I also have one at my desk. Bob obviously has the one that went to space. Mine is a replica, but we love seeing these zero-G indicators. It's a really nice way to connect those of us on ground with the folks up in space. So as I said before, we are anticipating nose cone deployment shortly. Just need to do a quick check-in, and there we can see now the nose cone, the hooks have been released, and we see that nose cone moving with a pretty up-close shot.
We're continuing to see that nose cone open, and
Acquisition of signal, line.
as we've mentioned, this does uncover a number of critical systems for the flight up to the space station that will be required for docking. There are 6 hooks that hold the nose cone in place during the launch and ascent portions. Those have begun to retract, and the nose cone is beginning to swing open. The nose cone is about 2/3 of the way open at this time, so we do expect it to be fully open here shortly.
Shortly after nose cone deployment, the crew will be able to get their visors open, and they'll be given the okay to get out of their suits, and that will allow them to settle in for their ride to the International Space Station.
It is about a 29-hour journey for the crew from launch to docking to the space station, but as you said, they'll be able to get out of their suits, get comfortable, get some rest, and just enjoy being in the microgravity environment of space. Again, we have 3 first-time flyers and 1 veteran on today's flight, but I'm sure it was an exciting moment. No matter how many times you've been to space, I can't imagine that it ever gets old.
I would probably agree with that. I would also imagine that the 3 first-time spacegoers will have a brief period of acclimation to gravity. I know I certainly would, and I also recognize that my period probably wouldn't be very brief in order to get acclimated to that lack of gravity. But yeah, this is something that the veteran astronauts on board station are, always happy to help really introduce the new spacegoers to the new environment.
Absolutely, and we did also hear that there was good service section Draco checkouts that took place. We are standing by for that nose cone to be fully deployed, but it should be coming here momentarily.
Dragon, we see a nominal nose cone opening, TCS and forward bulkhead Draco checkouts.
Dragon copies.
Next burn is the upcoming phase burn per your displays.
We see the phase burn in 28 minutes.
Good readback.
So you heard it there. The nose cone has fully been opened successfully. We had some good checkouts on the Draco thrusters, on the service section Draco thrusters rather, and we also had nominal forward bulkhead checkouts.
That's right, and the astronauts should be getting the okay to doff or remove their suits in about 6 or 7 minutes. I would imagine that, as Sandra mentioned before, we do have 3 space newbies on board today. I would imagine that they would be pretty excited to get out of their seats. They've been in these seats for a while. The crew ingressed hours ago, and I would imagine that the 3 folks and even the veteran, everybody would be excited to get out and be able to float around a little bit for the first time on this Crew-5 mission.
Yes, absolutely. And you do see the crew working through some procedures there on the touchpads that they do have in front of them. They'll continue to have those available for them throughout their flight uphill. Again, this is going to be about a 29-hour launch to docking for Crew-5.
It seems as though that 0G indicator may have floated out of view, perhaps up above the crew displays. We can see that the visors are up.
Dragon, SpaceX, environments are looking good for suit doffing. For today, we can leave the camera configured for a little while longer, but at this time, you are go for 4.012 and 4.300. As a reminder, please stow the suits with the visors closed. I'll copy.
Okay, Dragon copies. We are go for 4.012 and 4.300. We're going to keep the cameras configured, and when we stow the suits, we'll do it with the visors closed.
Good readback. At this time, you're also go to tell the world a little bit about that stowaway we saw shortly after second engine cutoff.
So we're standing by for a few words from the crew about that 0G indicator. And there it is.
SpaceX Dragon back in the ground. We missed the last part of your transmission.
And no worries, repeating my last on there. I was going to have you all talk a little bit about your 0G indicator, but we can hold that off for the next ground station pass here for Dubai. At this time, what I'll do is I'll take the cameras external for suit doffing, and then you let me know when they're allowed to come back on board.
Okay, Dragon copies. So we'll let you know when you come back on with the cameras, and we're excited to talk about our stowaway here.
Okay, Dragon copies and working.
And it does sound like we are in a brief expected loss of signal with the crew. This does happen from time to time when we're in between our satellites, but we will have views and communication back with them here shortly, and we're looking forward to hearing their words on their stowaway and what that special meaning is for the crew. So with Crew-5 now successfully on orbit, let's head over to our counterparts at Kennedy Space Center in Florida. Daryl, it was spectacular to watch this launch from here in Hawthorne, but tell me, what was it like to see it on the ground?
It was amazing. First of all, we got an idyllic day right here on the Space Coast. I mean, the temperatures are like, mid-70s. There's a cool breeze. Phenomenal launch. Bob, I want to get your thoughts. You've flown, you've watched. This was pretty perfect.
No, this was just outstanding. It was picturesque, with the blue sky, the blue background, a beautiful day here in Florida. The only thing I wish was that I was there with them, because that is the one place that is better to watch a launch from than right here at the Kennedy Space Center is on board the rocket ship.
I got to believe that. And though we weren't on board, we did get to watch the views as we were going up and saw them land the booster, which, by the way, that booster also going to be SpaceX's and NASA's Crew-6 booster. So more the reuse, NASA taking advantage of that as well.
Absolutely. Every chance that we get to reuse a capsule or reuse a booster kind of drives down costs and increases the opportunity for more folks to fly in space.
Now I'm headed out to take a swim, right? I mean, this is just perfect out here. Bob, thank you for your thoughts. And now we're going to move on. We've got an interview here with Robin Gatens, the director of the International Space Station, who also joins us here. And you got to experience the launch from right here outside the press site. And I want to ask you, how did you enjoy it?
Well, it's always exciting to see launch to the International Space Station. I've seen many, but especially to see a new international crew headed to the International Space Station was very exciting. And of course, you nailed it. Beautiful day. Really glad we got this one off today.
Absolutely, and they'll make that 29-hour transit to the space station. You're the director of the International Space Station, so I want to ask you, I heard there's a book coming out that's there have been books before about the International Space Station, but a new one's coming out. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's called Our Benefits to Humanity. It is a publication we have put out before, and we actually released it in July, so it's out. It's both in print format as well as online, so people can just search on Benefits for Humanity, International Space Station, and find that book. And it highlights all of the wonderful research that's going on the space station. This crew will be doing over 200 experiments during their time on the International Space Station, ranging from medical kinds of research that will help treat diseases and produce new drugs here on Earth, regenerative medicine. One day we might even print organs for transplant on Earth. We have Earth science going on Space Station, a number of climate instruments to help us understand Earth's climate. Really exciting results. This is truly what we call the decade of results on the International Space Station, where we're building on past lessons and capabilities to just compound the results that we're able to get out of the space station.
And 235 investigations, 76 new ones, and you mentioned the decade. 2 decades, more than 2 decades, the International Space Station has been operating. You mentioned some of the science that they're going to be doing. Now I'm wondering if you have a favorite that you've kind of identified, like, oh, I can't wait to find out the results of that.
Well, I've been tracking a lot of them. I'm really excited about some of the medical things. We're flying again a payload by a company called Lambda Vision, and they're producing retinal implants that could be used to help patients with ocular degeneration. So that's really exciting. I'm excited about what we're learning, with respect to the climate. We got brand new climate instruments up on board. We've got companies learning how to make better products through their research on through the ISS National Lab. And their work on the space station. So I'm also excited about plant research going on Space Station. I think that's not only important for future exploration missions, but also to help us grow plants in harsh environments, small spaces here on Earth.
And also NASA, while doing all of that, is continuing to work towards its ultimate goal of getting to the moon, going back to the moon and sustaining our presence there. A lot of technology at the station that works towards that end. We want to actually pause, though, for 1 second, because we understand that one of the astronauts, Josh Cassada, has a statement that he is going to make. It is relatively about his zero-G indicator, which, if you saw in the coverage, it was I don't know if it was a baby Einstein, Bob, but it was a little Einstein.
It definitely looked like a small Einstein, but we'll listen to Josh and hear exactly the details.
Let's listen in. Again, waiting for astronaut Josh Cassada with a special message.
And Dragon, cameras are internal.
SpaceX. Dragon copies. We are internal with the waistbands off and stand by for the cabin mic check.
You see Koichi Wakata is out of his seat.
Yeah, SpaceX Dragon from the cabin mic comm check.
And Koichi, I've got you 5x5. How me?
Mike, we have you loud and clear also.
Great news, and we're also getting some great views inside the capsule here, so if you all want to get a chance to talk about your indicator, we'd all love to hear some.
Absolutely, Mike. So, a couple of years after he come up with his groundbreaking theory of special relativity, Albert Einstein, in his mind, still had a couple loose ends to tie up.
while he was sitting in the patent office, because he wasn't famous yet, definitely should have been, he had what his happiest thought of his entire life. That thought was, person in free fall doesn't feel their own weight. That thought, along with some others that he built upon, led to general relativity and our understanding of gravitation and curvature of space-time. We're experiencing Einstein's happiest thought continuously, like the International Space Station has been doing for over 20 years. On Crew-5, call this little guy our free fall indicator. We're here to tell you there's plenty of gravity up here. In fact, that's what's keeping us in orbit right now and preventing this trip on a Crew-Dragon from being a one-way trip. A little bit like life. We live in the same world, we live in the same universe. Sometimes we experience it in a very different way from our neighbors. We can all keep that in mind. Hopefully we can all continue to do absolutely amazing things, do it together.
Well, that was excellent, Josh. We appreciate you all taking the chance to share with us some of those special words and some of the meaning to you all.
I'll tell you, my crewmates are just happy that we didn't break out a dry erase board and get into more detail.
We'll chat lensing later.
Absolutely.
A message from
at this time,
astronaut Josh Cassada, the pilot of Crew-5, and his fellow astronauts and cosmonaut, floating in space high above the Earth as they head to the International Space Station with a special message about Albert Einstein, who is represented there floating around space as the zero-G indicator, but then also a nod to his theory of relativity. E equals MC squared, I believe, Bob.
Well, there are a lot of great things that Einstein was responsible for, and I would just say that maybe there are 5 folks experiencing his happiest thought on board the Dragon capsule just right now.
Absolutely, and NASA is looking to return humans to the surface of the moon, and this is part of it, going to the International Space Station. We mentioned some of the efforts in going up there, and of course the science that's going to be done by Crew-5. We're looking forward to that as well. Some final thoughts, Bob, about the day today.
Well, it was just a wonderful day, a chance for me to relive the launch experience with the Falcon 9 and the Dragon capsule, and I'm just super excited for the Crew-5 and little Einstein on board and in free fall right now.
A very special moment indeed. Before we wrap up, I want to send it over to Megan Cruz, who is with Deputy Administrator and former Space Shuttle astronaut Pam Melroy.
I am Pam, and I have just been chatting about how wonderful of a day this was for a launch.
Oh, it's a gorgeous day here at the historic Kennedy Space Center. For me to see the next generation of launch vehicles launching to the space station was thrilling.
And also the next generation of young explorers. You know, you and I were talking about a young boy here, guys, that bought a space suit, an astronaut suit from downstairs at our store and was wearing it around and running around. How cute was that to see him so excited?
Well, I found it pretty cute to see the 3 rookies who were on the flight, as well as my very dear personal friend Koichi Wakata, who I flew with in 2000 to the space station. So I'm inspired by both the young and the experienced.
And speak to me about that like you said, you've flown on the space shuttle 3 times. Talk to me about that ascent, how it must feel as they're going up through the atmosphere.
It's absolutely a remarkable experience, and I found myself thinking as I was looking at the schedule for this rocket, how physics drives so much of what we do. So it's very similar in the timing of everything, but the space shuttle was a little bit of a wild ride, I have to say. It had a lot of vibration, particularly the first 2 minutes. But, you know, it's a very different experience when you're here on the ground. It always brings tears to my eyes. I pray for the crew. When you're inside the vehicle, you're having a blast.
So I'm glad to hear that they were having a blast. Talk to me about why these commercial crew missions are so important.
Well, they're really important to us for a lot of different reasons. The whole value that NASA brings to the American people and, in fact, to humanity is around science, a strong science and technology posture for the country, and inspiration. And we see that all wrapped up in Commercial Crew, because we see the ability to do more science on orbit because we can carry more crew members. We see the advancements that have been made through NASA investments in commercial crew and commercial cargo that are lifting our entire space industry. And of course, there's nothing better than seeing an astronaut fly to space for inspiration.
Sure. And what's next for NASA? You know, right behind us, we have the vehicle assembly building. Inside is NASA's Artemis 1 rocket. Are you excited for that?
Oh, I'm very excited. I'll tell you, it's a big deal when a new rocket flies for the first time. And we have learned a lot. We have a lot to learn, just like I was a test pilot. So when we flew airplanes, we never actually launched the first try. Usually we just taxied down the runway. So we've taken her out to the runway a couple of times now, and we've learned a lot. And I cannot wait to see the most powerful rocket in the world launch going to the moon.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of great stuff here, and we're so happy to bring viewers on the ride with us, right?
You bet. That's the whole idea. NASA shares and inspires.
Perfect. Pam, thank you so much. I appreciate you being here. Guys, we're going to send it back to you for the last time today.
Thank you very much, Megan. Great job out there. Appreciate it. And Nicole, Josh, and Koichi and Anna are now on course to arrive at the International Space Station around 4:57 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. And of course, NASA TV will stay on the air for continuous live coverage along Crew-5's entire ride to station. Meanwhile, SpaceX's YouTube channel will join live coverage starting at roughly 2 hours prior to docking. And though our coverage here at Kennedy is coming to a close, we will turn it over to the team in Houston to take us through the next phases of the Crew-5 mission all the way through the arrival at the International Space Station. For those of you watching online on NASA's YouTube, make sure you take a look at the description below. You'll see the video link there, and you'll find that for Crew-5 Coast Phase. Live coverage will continue at that link shortly. You can see it at the bottom of your screen. Pull that up for you. If you're watching on NASA TV, you won't notice a thing, and coverage will continue. So a post-launch news conference is scheduled for 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time on NASA TV, and you can find mission updates on Twitter at NASA, at SpaceX, and on the web at nasa.gov, including timing on any potential live tours of Dragon Endurance during the trip to station. Now, before we sign off from Kennedy, I want to thank my partner and co-host, Bob Behnken, for being on the launch broadcast, sharing your incredible insight and experiences. Bob, I really enjoyed listening to you today. Thank you so much to you and to Megan, your wife, who helped us with Crew-4. We look forward to hearing more from your family, as well as maybe seeing Theo on a future launch broadcast.
Well, thank you, Daryl. I very much appreciate that. And, of course, thank you to my wife and my son and our dog Shadow for joining us for a short period of time during today's broadcast. And, again, I just want to echo Deputy Administrator Pam Mulroy's words with it's been an exciting year. The Crew-5 folks are just getting started on their excitement for the year, if you will, on their way to the space station right now. But we've got an Artemis 1 rocket over there, the SLS, in the vehicle assembly building. Looking forward to seeing that back out on the pad and getting her launched later this year.
Coming to a launch pad soon, mid-November, we all hope, and we're looking forward to that as well immensely. Huge thanks to all of our guests for joining us today, and thank you to all of you for watching. Here now are the highlights from the journey we took today, and just a reminder from here at the Kennedy Space Center to keep looking up. They're getting suited up inside that historic suit-up room, everything going smoothly. And there they are, the astronauts of Crew-5 taking their first steps outside.
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, engines full power, and liftoff. Go Crew. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Vehicle is pitching downrange Now, yesterday during launch is a little bit of a different story because the crew, like you said, is experiencing that change in acceleration. So at that point, they are able to really feel those G's that they're pulling as they do travel a lot faster than they were on the launch pad before they blasted off.
Absolutely.
So Dragon is now under 300 meters from the space station. Looks like it's about 294 meters away. You can see it continuing to get larger and larger in the screen.
This is a really cool shot because now we have something for a frame of reference other than planet Earth.
So this view from a camera on the port truss segment of the station, you are just barely seeing the Japanese robotic arm in the very center of the screen there, as well as part of the Japanese logistics module on the right that houses some experiments conducted aboard the space station. So one of our crew members for this flight is Koichi Wakata, who is an astronaut from the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency.
We're just under 6 minutes until we hit waypoint 1. As we've mentioned before, this movement from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1 will swing Dragon up and out in front of the station. So if you've been watching that capsule, it has been moving slightly in that frame. So it'll move up and in front of the station, and it'll pause at a distance of approximately 220 meters. At that point in time, Dragon will be on what we call the docking axis, which basically means that it's directly in front of the docking port that it will be aiming for. That port is the forward port on node 2, which is the Harmony module, and that's where both of the international docking adapters, or IDAs, are located. Those were installed for new commercial spacecraft flights and any other future spacecraft that also use the international docking standard.
And you could really see in that graphic that was just on your screen how those different burns in this very phased approach really put Dragon into the place that it is now, exactly right in front of the docking adapter. You can really start to make out the International Space Station. You can see the solar arrays there, and even some of the vehicles that are currently docked to the space station. There's right now 4 vehicles docked to the International Space Station. That includes the SpaceX Freedom capsule, which Crew 4 arrived on and will return back home shortly, as well as the Russian Progress 80 and 81, and the Soyuz MS-22.
Once again, we are heading toward waypoint 1, about 3.5 minutes until that checkpoint is reached. After that, it will be on to waypoint 2, and that is once Dragon is only 20 meters away. At waypoint 2, the spacecraft will focus on aligning its docking system with the docking adapter. Dragon will fly in and make contact with the docking adapter, and that will give us what we call soft capture. That soft capture ring will then retract until sensors indicate that it's time for the hooks to drive in place, and then give us that hard capture, which firmly secures Dragon to station. And then after that hard capture is confirmed, we'll do leak checks for that hatch opening. And that is always a moment that's really fun to watch. Well, I guess I should say it takes time, right? Once the hatch is open, it's another several minutes before they can actually egress, but it's really nice to see the crews greet each other after Dragon's arrival.
It's worth the wait.
Absolutely.
And as Dragon continues to get closer to the space station ahead of docking, we are hearing that everything is proceeding as expected. Still looking towards an on-time docking at 1:57 Pacific this afternoon. And you are starting to see some blinking light.
Dragon in station, SpaceX on the big loop. Expect reconfiguration of the C2V2 link shortly.
Dragon copy.
Copies.
And you did just hear that call about the C2V2 system being reconfigured. The C2V2 system is the common communications for visiting vehicles, and that really helps to set up the data stream from Dragon to the space station and provides another path for Dragon telemetry to reach Earth.
I think that should be renamed C squared, V squared. There we have live views from inside Dragon Endurance with the Crew-5 crew. All 4 astronauts are in their seats, buckled in, and as you can see, their suits are on, but the visors are up. So earlier, the crew donned or put on their suits, and we had 4 good leak suit checkouts, kind of a mouthful to say there, and basically in order to execute that, we have the crew put their suits on, put the visors down, lock it into place, and then they get in their seats, they hook up the umbilical, just like they did whenever they ingressed into the capsule prior to launch, and then we pressurize the suits at a certain determined pressure for a certain amount of time, and then we basically just check to make sure that those suits are holding that pressure, and then that's the leak check. So once that's good, we're able to continue on with the approach timeline, which gosh, I think it might have been about an hour ago. Feels that much? Feels that way. I don't know. Time's kind of distorted over the last 40 hours. It feels like. But yeah. So with the crew in their seats, they are buckled in. It's a 5-point safety harness that it acts basically as a pretty advanced seatbelt. And the crew, of course, is basically plugged into their seats. We had a view just a moment ago using the umbilical, and that, of course, provides communication, telemetry of the crew themselves, and also fresh air. So while they're sitting there in their seats, we are pumping a nitrogen-oxygen mixture through the suit. As I mentioned before, we are an active operations building here, so you'll have to excuse the background noise behind us. But yeah, the crew is very comfortable in their suits. We are flowing some of that fresh air of that nitrox mixture through the suits, nitrox being the same stuff that you breathe whenever you're scuba diving.
As we await confirmation of Waypoint 1, the International Space Station is flying 264 statute miles over Washington State. In fact, just a few moments ago, it flew over the city of Seattle. So if any of you were outside, you might have caught a glimpse of it flying overhead. But it looks like it's already passing into Canada, and that just really goes to show how fast 17,500 miles per hour is. You cover a lot of ground when you're going that quick.
For sure. It's that exact point is kind of what makes it easy to spot, especially at night. Just, looking up at the night sky, I myself have an app that alerts me whenever there's going to be an ISS pass overhead, but I've actually accidentally seen it sometimes too, and look at it and it's this constant bright light, and a lot of people think, oh, it's an airplane, but if you really watch it, it's going way faster than an airplane is.
And if you are interested to see when the International Space Station is flying over where you live, you can go to the website Spot the Station on NASA's website, and you can put in your address, your location, and see when it's going to be flying overhead. Like Kate mentioned, it is a pretty cool thing to see.
Yeah, it is pretty neat. Actually, this is a good representation of how we're able to see the station while we are on planet Earth. So you can see the space station there has lots of solar panels, and it's pretty bright when the sun is shining on it. So at nighttime, when the space station is orbiting Earth, those solar panels in the station itself will reflect the sun's light back down at us. And that's what makes it so easy to spot. The other thing to keep in mind is that there's no blinking, so that's a good differentiator between an airplane and the station. The space station, you won't see any blinking coming from the station.
And we are now under 250 meters away from the space station. And you are getting a view of Mission Control in Hawthorne, which is just behind us here.
This is the room where all of the SpaceX flight controllers, responsible engineers, and the core, the crew operations and resources engineer, is positioned, or excuse me, is seated as they are basically constantly monitoring Dragon. We have someone on console 24/7 while there is a Dragon on station or in orbit, and this is one of the rooms that we do that in.
And similarly, in the International Space Station Flight Control.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop. We see Endurance 2 minutes out from waypoint 1. Soft capture ring extension will begin shortly, and Dragon will continue approach to waypoint 2.
I can copy.
And those words there as we continue to make our way to waypoint 1, now 237 meters away from the International Space Station.
As we've mentioned before, these checkpoints, these imaginary zones that we keep talking about are very important for Dragon, or really any spacecraft that's heading to or departing from the space station have to abide by, because everything is everything is designed to keep the crews both inside the spacecraft as well as the crew on station safe. There are many checkpoints just to make sure that all systems are functioning properly and as expected with the spacecraft prior to allowing it to get any closer to the station.
And we are hearing that we're just about a minute out from reaching waypoint 1. Dragon 231 meters away from space station. So we are coming up on waypoint 1, which is 220 meters right in front of the space station. And that milestone will put us right in line with the docking access. So once Dragon reaches that docking access, it will have about 20 hours of power, so it could easily hold there for quite some time and could reattempt to dock if necessary, but everything is really proceeding on track for docking today. And we did just hear confirmation that we are at waypoint 1.
The next milestone will be waypoint 2, and that's coming up in just under 8 minutes. As we mentioned before, everything is a series of checks and phases really of approach. In this next phase, we're going to be heading to waypoint 2, and at that point in time, Dragon will basically be in line with the dock that it is heading to. Of course, it's using the
station Houston on the big loop.
Houston with you on the big loop.
Please monitor approach per step 3 of 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring. Let us know when your review is complete and you are ready for docking.
And Houston, procedure review is complete. Station crew is ready for docking.
Houston copies.
And we were just getting an incredible view there of both Dragon and the moon with Earth in the background. Pretty spectacular
and also,
to see.
station has Dragon video.
Copy that.
And there you can see that view again. The moon in the farthest portion of your screen there, the furthest back circle, Dragon in the middle, and the International Space Station in the closest field of view, of course, with our pale blue dot underneath it.
Again, the station and Crew Dragon are traveling at 17,000 miles per hour, 17,500 miles per hour around planet Earth. So while it looks like Earth is rotating slowly, it's actually going pretty quick. The station is roughly 250 miles above Earth. You can think of that as the distance from Los Angeles to San Francisco, or perhaps from Kennedy Space Center to Miami, depending on which frame of reference relates most to you. But yeah, this view with the moon, again, the moon is on is that dot on the left. Crew Dragon is the dot on the right, of course, heading toward the station. So at this point in time, we have completed, we have reached waypoint 1. We are heading toward waypoint 2, which is expected in about 5 minutes. Initial contact between Dragon and the International Space Station is expected to occur at about 1:57 p.m. Pacific time. Before reaching waypoint 1, mission operators conducted a go, no-go poll to allow Dragon to begin its approach to waypoint 2, which is located inside the keep out sphere, one of those imaginary shapes that we keep talking about, and that is about 20 meters away from the space station.
And as mentioned previously, all visiting vehicles take this phased approach to station, stopping at predetermined gates for teams to run quick checks on vehicle performance before approaching the space station. And when it comes to bringing two spacecraft together, slow and steady really wins the race, as docking operations require a great deal of precision to make sure we're keeping the spacecraft and the crew safe.
Absolutely. At the 20-meter distance from the station's docking adapter, Dragon's approach will slow, and it will begin to align itself with the adapter to come in for the final approach.
Dragon will first make initial soft contact with the adapter's soft capture ring, which will then retract to bring Dragon in for the hard capture sequence. As a further precaution, Dragon's soft capture system includes a set of rotary spring dampeners to lessen the force of the contact between the capsule and the station. So for now, let's check in with NASA's Shaniqua Vereen in Houston for an update on station. Shaniqua?
Thanks, Sandra. So far this afternoon, the crew on the station awoke around 1 p.m. Central Time from a nap period, understanding they would have a longer day being in Greenwich Mean Time, and they continued preparations for Crew-5's arrival. That included setting up casas, or temporary living quarters, for the additional crew members, and special software in the station's cupola to track Dragon's approach and docking.
C2V2 link reconfiguration and soft capture ring extension complete. Dragon is configured for docking.
Copy.
And you just heard from the core and SpaceX Mission Control. That was Jake Vindel reporting to Nicole Mann, commander of Dragon, that they are configured for docking. Back on the International Space Station, we have NASA's Kjell Lindgren being prime for monitoring and making sure Dragon endurance stays in the expected zones, Once Dragon is docked, it will join 4 parked spacecraft at the International Space Station, including SpaceX Dragon Freedom, which brought up the Crew-4 astronauts back in April, Russia's Soyuz MS-22 cruise ship, and Progress 80 and 81 resupply ships. Again, after docked, Lindgren will also be primed to start hatch opening operations.
SpaceX on the Big Loop, Houston and Hawthorne have pulled go for docking. Confirm visors down and that you are ready for approach 2.
SpaceX Crew-5, all visors are down. We are ready for approach 2.
Copy Crew-5, visors down. We're going to enable the approach shortly. As a reminder, once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Copy.
And you just heard another call from the Corps at MCCX responding to the crew that they are in preparation for docking in just about 13 minutes from now, and looking at to arrive at waypoint 2 in about 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Again, once docked, NASA astronaut Kjell Lindgren will be primed for getting ready for hatch operations. That includes him going to the large hatch on the node 2 forward, giving him access into the pressurized mating adapter. The crew then will have to pressurize the vestibule, which is the small space between the hatches on the Dragon and the space station. This was exposed to the vacuum of space prior to docking, so the crew will then need to fill it with air and make sure its pressure is nearly equal to that of the atmospheric pressure on Dragon and inside the station. Lindgren will use a small valve that on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the station's vestibule. Flight controllers here in Houston will monitor and verify the pressure readings here to make sure that everything's leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches for the crew. NASA Flight Director Greg Whitney is leading teams here in Mission Control Houston for Dragon's approach and docking today, and it's arriving in just about 12 minutes and 37 seconds. To his right is Capcom Amy Dill, who will be communicating with the crew aboard station. Right now, there are currently 7 astronauts on the station, 7 astronauts and cosmonauts living and working on the International Space Station, including NASA's Kjell Lindgren, Bob Hines, Jessica Watkins, Frank Rubio, and the current station commander and European Space Agency astronaut Samantha Cristoforetti, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Petelin. Crew-5 bringing the crew complement to 11. Again, we're excited to get our Crew-5 astronauts aboard. That's the latest from here in Mission Control Houston. Back over to you, Hawthorne.
Shaniqua. Now at this point in time, waypoint 2 is up next, and that will put Dragon only 20 meters away from the space station. From there, the spacecraft will focus on aligning its docking system with the International Docking Adapter, or as you sometimes hear it referred to as the IDA.
And Dragon is now less than 40 meters away from space station. In fact, it's now 37 meters and closing away from docking. You're getting a good view right now of the trunk with those solar arrays that we chatted about earlier. Once Dragon does dock, it will be receiving its power from the International Space Station. And you can also see some of those small thruster firings as we continue to close in on docking, just making sure everything is precisely aligned and that Dragon is directly in front of the International Docking Adapter. We're about 20 seconds away from waypoint 2 arrival. We are expecting docking to occur just a little bit later than planned, about 10 minutes from now. Dragon 25. And we did just hear confirmation that Dragon has arrived at waypoint 2.
Once again, we're about 10 minutes away from docking to the International Space Station. We have a great view there on your screen of the forward hatch of Dragon. We can see that docking mechanism, the gray pieces there now exposed, and we have a great shot of it now that Dragon is so close to station.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. Dragon is resuming approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 in 1.102 Dragon approach and retreat monitoring.
Station copies. We'll go.
And that's the call we wanted to hear. Dragon is go for docking. Just a few meters away from the space station now, but when we are about at the 2-meter point, you may hear a call called CHOP, and that stands for the crew hands-off period. While everything has been done autonomously today so far, when we do hear that call CHOP, it means that any re-rendezvous would need to be done automatically through Dragon, and the crew would not be initiating any of that. We are 16 meters away from the International Space Station. On the left is Crew Dragon Endurance coming in for docking. On the top right with its nose cone deployed is the Crew Dragon Freedom that is currently docked to the International Space Station and is the vehicle that Crew 4 will return home on.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to see, excuse me, both two Dragons really in the same shot. Once again, the Crew-5 vehicle there on the left, making its docking approach, which we're expecting in under 10 minutes. And then, of course, the Crew-4 vehicle there on the previous shot on the right-hand side. As we get closer, we can see more and more of the Dragon vehicle. For those of you wondering what those 4 black circles are, those are the forward Draco thrusters.
SpaceX copies, 10 meters.
And 10 meters away from space station now. And if you look at the Dragon capsule, you can actually see the side Draco thrusters thrusting, helping to steer Dragon closer to station accurately.
And hearing we're just a couple of minutes away from docking should be coming up just momentarily. Dragon now traveling less than 1 meter per second as it closes in for docking.
As you've said before, Sandra, slow and steady wins the race here.
Less than 10 meters separating Dragon from the space station.
Copy, 5 meters.
And that call, 5 meters separating Dragon from space station. Should be about a minute until we are docked and Crew 5 is home for the next few months. Should hear that call for CHOP here momentarily.
2 meters, CHOP.
And there it was.
Copy, 2 meters.
2 meters, crew hands-off point. Happens about 25 seconds before contact.
1 meter.
1 meter.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, contact and soft capture complete. Attenuation in progress.
And contact confirmed. Dragon made contact with the International Space Station at 2:01 p.m. Pacific, just off the west coast of Africa.
Now, there are still a few steps that Dragon has to complete before it is securely attached to the station. So we are going to walk through those. We're going to have completion of that soft capture ring retraction, and then we're going to begin the hard capture sequence. And then a few minutes after that, some time passes, that we will have completion of that hard docking.
Dragon, SpaceX, ring retraction in progress.
So there is that first thing I mentioned, that ring retraction for soft capture.
And that soft capture ring will retract until its sensors indicate that it is time for the hooks to drive and create a hard capture. There are 12 hooks that are going to be driven to form that hard mate, and they take place in a series of 6. So the first 6 will drive, and then the second 6 will drive.
Just like everything about the approach this morning, everything is in sequence. Now you might notice the view of Dragon is a little darker than it was before as it was coming in. Of course, the station and now Dragon are orbiting Earth, and it looks like they are lost the sunlight there. Live view there from SpaceX Mission Control, based here in Hawthorne, California.
And so if you are just tuning in with us, Crew-5 has safely completed docking to the International Space Station. That docking occurred at 4:01 p.m. just off the west coast of Africa. Their journey began yesterday afternoon when they lifted off at 11 a.m. Central Time from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. 3 first-time flyers on board Crew-5 and 1 veteran astronaut from JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, Koichi Wakata. And then those 3 first-time flyers are NASA astronaut Nicole Mann, who is the first ever female commander of a Dragon, and once she floats on board Space Station will be the first Native American to ever visit the International Space Station, as well as NASA astronaut Josh Cassada, who's the first-time flyer as well, and the other first-time flyer is Roscosmos cosmonaut Anya Kikina.
That's right. Now, we have a little over 5 minutes left until docking is considered complete. As Sandra was just mentioning, the 3 first-time spacegoers on this mission, I would have to imagine that at this point in time, they must be like children sitting in a car seat, just wanting to get out. They have spent a long time making this journey, literally since launch yesterday at noon Eastern time. And they have friends on board station, and I bet they're just so excited to get out of their seats, get out of their suits, open up that hatch, and ultimately go get to hang out with their friends for a couple months.
Absolutely.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
Second copy.
And we did hear confirmation that the soft capture ring retraction is complete. So the next up is that hard capture sequence start. Again, there's 12 hooks that are going to drive in to create that hard dock between Dragon and the space station. We'll first see 6 of those hooks begin to drive, and then the other 6, and that will have our docking be complete.
Now, looking forward to the next events, like I mentioned before, we have about now 4 minutes left until docking is complete. The Crew-5 crew will have the opportunity to doff or take off their suits. And then it's almost 90 minutes until they actually get to open that APAS hatch and get to go see their friends, really get to greet the Crew-4 crew and the other members, other astronauts that are on station. So as we've mentioned before, everything is a series of checks and check-ins. Everything is a checklist, a sequence of events, and so yeah, they're at the station.
Station Houston on the Big Loop. MCS configured. Proceeding with hook driving.
So there's that confirmation that we will begin to drive that first set of 6 hooks, and that is basically that hard capture process.
So hooks are driving. This is the second time in the flight that we have done something with these hooks. They were also used just a short time after liftoff, after Dragon was inserted into a nominal orbit, and they helped to allow that nose cone to swing open. So hooks are continuing to drive. First 6 hooks driving.
Live view there inside the Dragon capsule. We can see the crew has their visors down in the locked position. Again, this is to ensure that if, for any unlikely event that Dragon were to lose pressurization, that suit would act as a second capsule, basically. It's it's almost a spacecraft of its own, being able to provide environment and pressure for the crew in an emergency.
And the crew does wear that spacesuit during all of the dynamic phases of flight, during launch, of course docking, but here pretty shortly they will be able to take off that spacesuit, and they'll actually hang them up to dry before they begin to pressurize that vestibule and get ready to float through the space station hatch.
As we've mentioned before, those suits are unique, especially fitted for each astronaut, so they all have their own storage locations that the suit will get stored in, and then they'll actually put them back on not right before they come home. They'll do another fit check basically shortly before they come home. So the Crew-4 crew will be doing that soon in preparation for their return back to Earth, hopefully next week. But yeah, that's basically just to make sure that the spacesuit that they arrived in still fits well, no like hot spots for movement, and is still good for them to wear home. As Sandra mentioned before, those of us here on Earth, we know what gravity feels like, and the body does change with a lack of gravity. So in the microgravity environment that the astronauts live and work in for months at a time, your bodily fluids change. So in space, your bodily fluids basically reach an equilibrium across your body, whereas here on Earth, they're concentrated near our feet, wherever down is. And so, we'll have the crew put those spacesuits back on prior to beginning their journey home, just to make sure that everything still fits well. Now, we should be getting confirmation that docking is complete here in the next couple of seconds. So standing by for confirmation of docking complete.
And we did hear that the first set of 6 hooks is driving and has completed that process. So now the next 6 are driving, and as you said, once we have that finished up, we will have docking complete, and we will have what we call a hard mate. So that should happen just a few moments from now. A second set of hooks is continuing to drive. And if you are just tuning in with us, 4 astronauts arrived to the International Space Station just minutes ago at 2:01 p.m. Pacific, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. And they did complete the soft capture ring retraction, which was the initial step in the docking sequence. And now we are completing the hard capture sequence. We've had the first 6 hooks drive, and we are standing by for confirmation that the last 6 have driven successfully. In all, there's 12 hooks that will mate Dragon to the International Space Station.
With that live view of Dragon there on your screen, we can see the pilot and commander. So from this viewpoint, it would be Commander Nicole Mann on the left-hand side of your screen.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, hard capture complete. Moving on to ring retraction and then umbilicals.
Dragon copy.
All right, and there we just heard that that hard capture is complete. Good news there.
Yeah, that's the call that we wanted to hear. All 12 of those hooks have made it to the space station as expected. So again, we do have a hard dock at this moment.
Now, once the crew gets confirmation that docking is complete, they'll then be given the go to doff or take off their spacesuits, and then begins the couple hours long process of opening the various hatches both on the Dragon side as well as the station side. So even though they have arrived at station and we have a hard dock, confirmed hard dock, there's still a couple hours left to go before the crew gets to before the Crew-5 crew gets to embrace their fellow space station crew members.
And there will be a couple of different tasks to do after we do get those hatches open in Dragon to just get ready for those docked operations. Most of it is focused on the atmospheric control on board Dragon. So they will be removing what's called a LiO canister, or a lithium hydroxide canister, that is used to help scrub CO2 from the Dragon cabin during free flight. And they'll also remove a seal that essentially integrates Dragon's cabin with the rest of the space station. And we did hear that the umbilical deploy is underway, as we've mentioned a couple of times. Once those umbilicals get set up and attached, that's how Dragon will get its power from the International Space Station. On the flight uphill, it utilized the solar arrays that are located on the Dragon's trunk.
Dragon, SpaceX on the big loop, umbilicals mated, docking sequence complete. Crew Dragon Endurance and Koichi, Nicole, Josh, and Anna, welcome to the International Space Station.
Thank you so much. Crew-5 is happy to have finally arrived at the International Space Station. Endurance is a very proper name for our training mission and the spacecraft. To the NASA and the SpaceX teams, a huge thank you, especially shout out to our training lead, Tyler Carr, for all the simulations you put us through and the training. We were definitely well prepared, and we are looking forward to getting to work.
We made it to the International Space Station. There's only through the efforts of so many people. We thank you, and we'll make you proud. Let's go, Expedition 68.
Thank you, everybody, for giving us this smooth ride, just like in the simulation. And you trained us well, and I really appreciate all the efforts of the SpaceX team, NASA, Roscosmos, JAXA, ESA, and Canada, of all these international partners. And I cannot wait to start working with our crewmates on Expedition 68.
Dragon, this is Station. We're glad to have you aboard. We'll see you here in a minute.
And there you just heard some words.
And Dragon, on behalf of SpaceX, it's been a pleasure working with all of you. Ground teams will be enabling hardline power and comm connection shortly as we work towards hatch opening. In the meantime, you are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012, and we'll bring the cameras external.
Hello everyone, I forgot to push a button. Everything is good. I really have emotions, and we have flew emotions and feelings, and really grateful to you everybody who did it to us. And we are looking forward to see and meet guys on the station that will do work all together.
Some lovely words there from the Crew-5 crew. They have just completed docking.
I got a 4.012.
Good read, Anna, and great words.
Last commentary there from Anna Kikina. I don't speak Russian, but I think there's a pep in her step. I think she's pretty excited to be there. So all that being said, now that Dragon has completed the docking sequence, the spacecraft must undergo a handful of checks before we're able to open that hatch. The crew on board Dragon will now get a chance to get out of their suits.
Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon to ground cameras are external.
And that was just SpaceX core, just letting the crew know that they're good to...
Okay, we copy. Turn on the cameras. Thank you, Jake.
Just letting the crew know that they are good to take off their suits. Those onboard cameras have now been turned off for privacy reasons. So yeah, the crew will get a chance to get out of their suits before moving into hatch operations.
That's right, and things will start to be picking up inside the space station too, as NASA's Kjell Lindgren gets the hatch on the station side ready to be opened and starts pressurizing that area known as the vestibule between the Dragon and station hatches. With Dragon docked, that's going to do it for us here in Hawthorne, but our coverage for Crew-5 won't stop here. The coverage will continue with our team positioned in the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston. So for Kate and I, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in. But Shaniqua, what's ahead for Dragon?
How you go?
Thanks, Sandra, and goodbye to my friends at SpaceX. Mission Control Houston will take you through to the hatch open anticipated at 5:42 p.m. Central Time, and the welcome ceremony expected around 7:15 p.m. Central Time. It was a very exciting moment here for us in Mission Control Houston following Dragon's docking. That was a successful docking at 4:01 p.m. Central Time, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time, while flying 259 statute miles off the coast of the west coast of Africa. It's great to see Dragon docked. Energy in the room here is high. There was applause and smiles all around the room upon docking. Now that we are docked, Kjell Lindgren is securing some hardware, then moving right into hatch operations. First, he will open the large hatch at the node 2 forward, giving him access inside the pressurized mating adapter. Then he'll have to pressurize the vestibule, which is the small space between the hatches on Dragon and the space station. This was exposed to vacuum prior to docking, and we need to fill it with air and make sure its pressure is nearly equal to that of the atmospheric pressure on Dragon and the space station. Lindgren will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule. Flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston will monitor the pressure and temperature readings inside. And
SpaceX Dragon on Dragon and ground. Com check from the cabin mic.
Koichi on the cabin mic, we've got you 5x5. How us on the speakers?
We got you loud and clear on the speakers. Thank you.
Station Houston on Space Ground 2 for Chell.
And you just heard a call out from Capcom here in Mission Control Houston. Amy Deal sitting right next to the flight director, Greg Whitney, leading the docking and rendezvous portion. We are currently docked to the station, and we are waiting for the crew to do some steps to be ready to open the hatch. We just heard a call to NASA's Kjell Lindgren, and he was given the go to go ahead and begin those hatch operations. First, he will open the large hatch at node 2 forward, giving him access inside the pressurized mating adapter. Then he'll have to pressurize the vestibule, which is a small space between the hatches on Dragon and the space station. This was exposed to vacuum prior to docking, and we need to fill it with air and make sure its pressure is nearly equal to that of the atmosphere on Dragon and the space station. Linger will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule. Flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston will monitor the pressure and temperature readings inside and verify that everything is leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches. Again, we're expecting hatch open to happen at 5:42 p.m. Central Time. Following hatch open, the crew will configure Dragon for on-orbit ops and get a safety briefing. With critical research and science aboard Dragon today, they will begin to unload the hardware. A few hours from then, we will have a welcome ceremony with all crew members for Crew-4 and Crew-5, as well as the astronauts and cosmonauts aboard the space station.
Station on the big loop. The node 2 forward hatch is open.
Copy, node 2 forward hatch open.
And you can see smiling and waving. The forward hatch on the Crew-Dragon Endurance has been opened. The crew inside International Space Station are all smiles and waves as they see the beginning of ingress from the Crew-5 crew from Dragon Endurance. And that was a confirmed hatch open at 5:49 p.m. Central Time, 6:49 p.m. Eastern Time. That hatch we've been waiting for is now open since docking at 4:01 p.m. Central Time, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Hatch opening taking place at 5:49 p.m. Central, 6:49 p.m. Eastern Time. All smiles on the International Space Station as they eagerly await the ingress of Crew-5. The hatch is open, but Crew-5 astronauts will need to work through a few more steps and gather some imagery as well. At the time of hatch open, Dragon and the International Space Station were flying 263 statute miles above the South Atlantic Ocean. It may be just a couple more minutes before Crew-5 astronauts ingress the space station to be welcomed onto their new home for the next 6 months as a part of Expedition 68 as they walk through a few more procedures. The crew inside of Dragon Endurance are installing some IMV ducting, mixing the air of the space station environment with the air inside the Crew Dragon Endurance. They'll seal some of the LiO or lithium hydroxide cartridges that scrubbed carbon dioxide inside of Dragon capsule on the ride to the International Space Station, and they'll check some vent valves as well, so maybe just a little bit more time until we welcome them on board the International Space Station. And here we come through. First one through the hatch is going to be Nicole Mann, commander of Dragon, and now the first Native American woman to live and stay aboard the International Space Station. All hugs and smiles going around. Next one through the hatch is Josh Cassada, the pilot of Dragon. He's getting his welcome and hellos from the crew aboard International Space Station. And we see right now, right past Nicole Mann's hair, is Koichi Wakata of JAXA coming through the hatch. And last but not least, Kikina of Roscosmos just entered the International Space Station, and Crew-5 is officially ingressed from Dragon Endurance into their home for the next 6 months, the International Space Station. And with the addition of Crew-5 on board, there is currently 11 astronauts inside the International Space Station. We're currently in a brief handover between satellites and should have the acquisition of signal back shortly. Bring you more views inside the International Space Station. Just moments ago, we saw Crew-5 ingress the station. And now we have the 11-person crew of Expedition 67 now all together in Node 2 of the International Space Station. Typically, we'd have a welcome and ceremony shortly after ingress of the crew. However, today, the crew will be unloading critical science and investigations, as well as finishing up some of those procedures to make Dragon ready for their 6-month stay docked to the International Space Station. We are expecting a welcoming ceremony around 7:15 p.m. Central Time. We'll have a brief intermission between the ingress of the crew as they unload that critical science and hardware from Dragon Endurance into the International Space Station. Again, we're expecting a welcome event for the crew around 7:15 p.m. Central Time, 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time. And that was an incredible day and a 29-hour rendezvous for the Crew-5 crew after launching successfully yesterday from the Launch Complex at Kennedy Space Center, Launch Complex 39A, at 11 a.m. Central Time, 12 Eastern. The crew docked at 4:01 p.m. Central Time, 5:01 p.m. Eastern Time. And just moments ago, at 5:49 p.m. Central Time, the hatch from Dragon Endurance was opened, and we just saw Crew-5 welcomed aboard the International Space Station. The population of the space station now at 11 human beings as a part of Expedition 68. It's been an incredible 24 hours for Crew-5, and from all of us here in Houston, welcome aboard Crew-5. That's our coverage for now, but do join us for the Crew-5 welcoming event and remarks at 7:15 p.m. Central Time. This is Mission Control Houston.